in the session then, and I'll share. Okay, I hope you see my screen presentation mode. Yes, great. So welcome to this session. My name is Luis Irga. You have read about me before in the course, and now finally we are having the opportunity to meet. So today, in today's session, we are discussing or reflecting about risk management, leadership, and group dynamics. This is the agenda for today's session. We'll start with risk management, addressing the role of risk management in project management, some strategies for risk management, some tools and methods on how to perform risk analysis, and we'll come up with an example as well so you can practice your risk management knowledge. And in the second part of this lecture, we'll discuss about leadership and group dynamics, addressing some leadership theories. We will understand different perspectives and how to navigate different types of leadership styles. And finally, we'll also reflect about group development and group dynamics and how these situations affect the leadership and leadership styles in project management. The idea is that whenever you have any questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt me so we can have a fruitful discussion and that you can also benefit from this session to your own project plan. Yeah, remembering that you are tasked with the development of a project plan, which is one of the main assignments of this course. So all this knowledge that we are developing today and sharing today is important so you can develop a proper project plan. Starting then with risk management, which is part of the planning part of the project, which precedes the execution of the project. So it's very important to understand or to address risk management before the execution of the project. But I tend to think that risk management and the risk management analysis and the documents are living entities. So the risk management mindset must be present all over the project from the start to the end, even though the planning part or the planning stage is the most proper one to deal or to handle and reflect about risk management. But the risk management is present all over the project. So the idea of risk management is to try to map and analyze what are the risks involved in a project, which kind of situations we can predict and we can avoid, or we can handle it in a good way that does not create a bad impact in our project. And if it's something that is not under our control, that we can create strategies to mitigate, to navigate, or reduce the negative impacts of the risks in our projects. And of course, to assess and evaluate how to better handle, distribute tasks, distribute resources, time, people, and attention, which are very important resources within the project, and how to better handle the risks. The risk analysis is really important because not only for the team, not only for the project leader and for the team, but to all other stakeholders involved in a project, especially the steering committee and the customers and sponsors. When you are applying for funds or when you are developing projects and communicating how you are planning to achieve the project goals, you must communicate what are the risks involved. Otherwise, you cannot get people on board of your project. In order for them to believe in the project that you are proposing, you need to communicate the risks. You need to make them aware of the risks that exist, and that you are also aware of the risks that exist within the project. And thinking from a resource management perspective, you are like involving resources, counting on someone else's financial resources, time, human resources, and so forth. You need to make them understand that, okay, this is the project, and even though you may have the best project in the world, there might be some risks, and you are aware of them, and you are prepared to tackle them within the project time. So my question to you is, why is it important to consider risk management during the planning phase? Why is the planning phase the most suitable phase to consider and to discuss about risk management? Do you guys have any idea?
Well, maybe if you want to convince other people of your project, you have to give them the whole picture. Otherwise, they might feel like maybe like dragged into something
Mhm.
when you just present it all rosy and without showing that actually you are aware that there are going to be difficulties. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think it's good to be transparent.
yeah,
And
that's really important. You mentioned transparency. It's something really important in the planning phase. Yeah, I mean all over the project, obviously, but in the planning phase mostly because we're communicating the ideas and planning how to execute them. It's a really
yeah,
good answer.
also maybe it's good to have some kind of plan B for some parts of the project.
Mhm.
Like, because we were, for example, talking about reforestation, because in Skåne, when you travel down from Halmstad, you will see the trees are like much less. And for the sustainability project, you have to reach the sustainability goal, the city of Helsingborg has to plant 62 hectares of trees. But
Mhm.
now one of the risks is the climate change, that actually the question is, can we really plant the same sort of trees, or are we going to have to test it like step by step, like what kind of trees actually are we going to plant?
Mhm.
So you cannot really foresee
Mhm.
exactly how the climate change is going to develop. So this is that's quite a risk.
Mhm. Really, really good example. I have a very similar example that of a project within a Brazilian municipality. I'm from Brazil. I forgot to mention, and I am based in Halmstad University. But in Brazil, there was one municipality that planned to create a green area within the highway. It was on the highway. It was in a road in the middle of the city, and they didn't calculate the risks properly. So they decided to go for a specific type of tree, and that tree produces a very oily fruit. And then when the fruits fall, they make the road very slippery. So after I don't know, I think it was 5 years, once the trees were mature and producing the fruits, there were many traffic accidents happening in that road, and they couldn't remove the trees because of the environmental impact. So they are having multiple traffic accidents. They can't do anything about that. They cannot just remove or burn down the trees, and they can't do anything to prevent the accident. So now they are in a very paradoxical situation because they didn't calculate the risks, or in the planning phase mostly, since the project was in the execution stage already, so they couldn't do anything. So this is a clear example, and I remember when you mentioned about planting the trees. So I can share that example with you guys later. It's a really interesting case of what not to do in a project. Yeah, as connecting to that, another reason, or one of the main reasons on why we address risk management during the planning phase, is that we can change things during the planning change, and they are not so costly. So before the execution, the planning stage or the planning phase is the most appropriate stage to promote changes within the project and to change things, resources, reallocate people, time, money, and etc. And it's not so costly for the project and for the organization, because during the execution, depending on the project, it may be even impossible to change some certain aspects. So that's why the risk management must be discussed no later than the planning stage. The risk categories, they normally fall into the risks. They normally fall into four categories, and I will provide some examples of them. The first one is the technology quality and execution. For example, when the project involves the implementation of a new technology, or the project has unrealistic goals in terms of technology, what the technology can deliver, or which kind of quality standards, the technological systems that are being involved in the project, or the tools involved in the project can deliver or can promote. The project management risks are associated with the project management per se. For example, poor time or resource allocation, a weak management of the team, or weak leadership. We'll talk about weak leadership in the second part of this session, but these are normally the risks related to the project. The organizational risks are related to the risks involving the organization as a whole. For example, time and resources, thinking from the organizational level, not the project level, unclear financing, resource overlap with other projects. This is something that it's very common in project-based organizations when they are handling multiple projects at the same time. So there are common risks about mismanagement resources within the projects, and or resource overlap with the concurrent projects. So there are projects running at the same time, and there's some resource overlap, and the boundaries are not so clear. These are risks that can affect the projects. And external risks that are factors that we have no control of. For example, change of laws, rules, from the institutional level, new policies, new governmental instructions and regulations, weather. We talked about weather before. So these are external things that can affect the project and that we have no control or little control of. The risk management, we can classify, or we can organize the risk management in 4 steps, starting with the identification of the risks. And these steps, they are overlapping. Here they are linear just for like demonstration purposes, but they overlap within the project. And they as I mentioned before, the risk management must be some sort of living entity within the project. So starting with the risk identification, what are the risks? How can we identify? How can we classify them? As we had in the previous slide, an example of a classification. Then once we identify the risks, how to evaluate them, which kind of impact they will have in the project. So whether they are moderate, they are severe, they are critical, we'll see that later. And then prioritize which kind of risks we must prioritize in terms of allocation of resources that we need to involve in order to tackle or to handle these risks. So we need to have some strategies to prioritize the risks that are more important for our project. And the risk response planning, finally, the action. Once we know the risks, we understand the impact the risks can have in our project, we'll identify and prioritize which of them are feasible or more important, and then the action plan, what to do, how to address these risks. Starting with the identification. So the risk identification, it's some sort of a practical exercise, and normally we recommend that you involve not only the team, the project leaders, but also the project team in order to understand from the different documents within the project, different tools that you are using to create the project. So which kind of risks are inherent from the project charter until the activity plan. So which kind of activities you can see that are risky. The SWOT analysis, for example, you have reflected, you have learned how to apply the SWOT analysis. The WBS, the same. So you can use all these tools and all these documents of the project to identify the potential risks. And you can, of course, cross them. So you can practice as an exercise, divide into teams and see, try to address or try to identify as many risks as possible. Common sources of risks. first of all, the change requirements or specifications. If you are, for example, developing a project within a municipality and there is something that has changed in the law or in the requirements from the customers, even if it's a private customer, you have to address and you have to be prepared and aware that, okay, there's a risk that the project might take another direction. Poorly defined roles and responsibilities. Now it's on the project leader. So when the responsibilities are poorly defined and the roles are poorly defined, maybe we'll run the risk of having people doing the same tasks or some tasks lacking clarity or instructions lacking clarity. So people don't know what to do within the project. So this is also one source of risk. Lack of competence, you have the wrong people assigned to do tasks within the project and they are not competent, they don't have the capabilities to do so. So this could be also a source of risks and so forth. These are just examples of common sources, but there are many others that you can identify within your project. So once we identify the risks from like the common sources and from multiple documents that you have access to, we have now to assess the risks or to evaluate the risks. So here we will discuss a qualitative risk analysis, but there are other tools and other methods that you can use to analyze and to assess the risks. So here we will start with the relation between the probability and the impact one risk can have in your project. So you will qualitatively, like based on your own judgment, define like or rank the risks according to the probability from 1 to 5, like below 20% or more than 80%. And you will calculate or you will attribute or estimate the impact that this risk will have in your project on a scale from 1 to 5, from low to high. So here we have an example from our textbook. So the probability or likelihood of that thing or of that risk to happen, you would then classify from 1 to 5, and the consequence or impact, if you prefer, also from 1 to 5. And then the risk value will be the product of the multiplication. You multiply the likelihood by the consequence, and then you have the risk value of your project. And in this table, you can also add the risk response, although we'll talk about the planning risk response later. But you can also add in this table, so it will be like really helpful for you to visualize and to understand what are the potential risks and how to address them. Okay. Any questions about this qualitative risk assessment or the mini risk method? No? Okay. You can find other tools in the textbook. There is the quantitative analysis. You can calculate the likelihood and the consequence in terms of resources and time. So you can be more specific and then you can create more columns. But the logic is pretty much the same. So you attribute a value or from 1 to 5, and then you calculate at the end to understand the risk value. So once we understand the risks, so we understand the value of the risks, now we need to prioritize which risks must be addressed at first hand. So we, based on that matrix, based on this matrix here, you can create this, or we can have this kind of visualization here. In terms of impact and likelihood from 1 to 25, as we have like maximum 5 for likelihood and maximum 5 points for impact. So worst case scenario, we will have an extreme risk with severe impact and like a high likelihood of that risk to happen. You attribute 25 points. Okay. So this also helps to understand and then prioritize which risks are more important and are more urgent to be addressed. Also based or similarly based on this matrix, we have the gap analysis. And the gap analysis, you will draw a scenario, also trying to quantify the risks that you have identified. Like you pick the current situation based on likelihood and the impact, and then the gap analysis will derive from a desired situation. For example, if you have a risk that is ranked as extreme with 20 points, that is the current situation. Here we can see the letter D in the current situation or in the current scenario. But you want to reduce this risk from 5 to 3. You want to drop from 5 to 3. Okay, so this risk must be prioritized because it's extreme. And in my current scenario, I want it to drop to from 5 to 3. So this is urgent. So the value of the risk is the gap analysis, is the difference between the current scenario, here 5, minus the desired scenario or the desired situation, 3. So the risk value will be 2. That's how more or less we calculate based on gap analysis. And then based on these calculations and different types of risks you have identified, you can define which ones must be prioritized. Okay? Questions about the prioritization and the gap analysis?
What are those ABCD? What is it?
Oh, these are risks. They are just named here
Numbers.
after AB. Yeah.
Okay.
But you can, if you, for example, you could have like you can name A, B, C, D in this table here, and then when you transfer to gap analysis, they will be represented in that way,
Okay.
just to
Yes.
facilitate the visualization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Any more questions? Okay, great. Let's move on then. Now we'll talk about action, how to respond the risks. And once we identify, we prioritize the risks, we have 4 options mainly, and according to this approach that we have in the book. The first one, we can avoid the risks. So you redesign or reformulate the project plan in a way that you eliminate the risks and then you protect the project from this risk impact. So it's not always possible to avoid risks. So you are mostly likely to have risks in your project. Some of them, depending on the impact, you can try to eliminate, but some of them are impossible to eliminate. For example, the weather. So we were talking about the climate change, how to eliminate the climate change. It's impossible. So instead of that, we can mitigate or take other actions that can help to reduce the likelihood. You can transfer risks. For example, you can use an insurance company or contract another supplier to transfer the risk. So you assume that a third party will take care of the risks. And I have a clear example of projects I've been working with, and we tend to transfer the risks here in Europe. I work with projects related to implementation of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And here we have big issues with the GDPR, data protection, because the European regulations are very strict when it comes to data sharing, data access, data privacy. And there are some risks and there are some things that we can't do here because of the law. But in other countries like the USA, they are much more flexible when it comes to data privacy, data access. So we transfer the risks to the American partners in the project. So they assume the risks because their law is more, flexible. It's not so rigid like in the EU. So it's a clear example of how to transfer the risks. But like in insurance companies, a clear way on how you can transfer the risks to someone else. So then this third entity, this third party will be held accountable for any risks that occur. You can mitigate and decrease the risks. So then based on that table that we have, remember in the last column, you can include ways to mitigate or to reduce the likelihood and or the consequences of the risks to impact in your project. So you can define action courses to reduce the likelihood and the consequences. And finally, you can just accept the risks, no action. This is also an option because there are some risks that you cannot simply eliminate or you can't do anything about it. So you just accept and embrace, okay? But this is like the last option. And even like when we talk about climate change, that is something that we cannot address, we cannot handle. It's always good to come up with some suggestion on how to mitigate, because you cannot mitigate, you cannot change the source, you cannot do anything about the climate change, but you can mitigate the consequences in your project. So, for example, you can protect like an office by installing, I don't know, let's a heating system, for example. If you have a project running in Alaska, and then you probably need a heating system or something. You cannot change the weather, but you can change the conditions on how the weather will impact in your project. So this is like a very extreme example. So remember that a risk response should be adequate. So you should match the risk and the action. So they must fit, they must match. It must be cost effective. Sometimes I've seen in projects that the risk mitigation actions are more expensive than the whole project. So that is not, it's not something good. So it must be cost effective, it must be feasible, it must be timely. So you need to include within the project. You cannot adopt or you cannot create a risk response action after the project ends. So you should be within the project. It must be realistic. You need to have something that is concrete, that you can deliver what you promise. It must be something acceptable and approved, remembering that most of the time this response action or risk response plan may demand more resources, people, time. So you have a manager that must approve. So it must be something that is acceptable and reasonable to all the stakeholders. And last but not least, it must be performed by an accountable person. So when you are thinking about risk management and risk analysis, you need to delegate this task to someone. And in your project plan, guys, remember that it's important to include in the risk analysis who will be accountable for the risk management, who will perform the analysis, who will be accountable for the risks. If the person doesn't mitigate the risks, what's going to happen? Okay. Normally, especially in large projects, some managers, they create task forces. There is a team that is dedicated to handle the risk management, that is responsible for risk management within the project. That is an ideal situation. It's not always like that, but yeah, it's always good to have at least one person dedicated for that. Here is just an exercise that you have access on Blackboard. It's about an entrepreneur who wants to establish a shoe shop, wants to start a shoe shop. So you have all this information there. And then the challenge for you guys, you can do it afterwards. It's not you don't have to do it right now, but it's to make a risk analysis using the mini risk method. Can use the table that I provided. I will upload the material in Blackboard afterwards. And you have to go through all these steps, the risk identification using the WBS, activity plan, and SWOT analysis. They are also available in Blackboard. And you can also use your own imagination based on the things related to the business, to the time, because it's before Christmas. So there might be something interesting related to this case that you can practice for you and learn for your own project plan. Then you go to the risk assessment, the probability and the consequences of each risk. You make the calculations. And finally, you should propose actions to those risks that you judge that are more important, or based on gap analysis, you can define those that are must be prioritized. Okay? Yeah, okay, let's move on. So here I would like to hear from you. I don't know in which stage are you with your own project plan, but thinking from the risk management perspective, which kind of risks can you identify in your project and how do you categorize them? Please feel free to share if you have any ideas or any thoughts about it.
Well, for me, it is really the climate change that's the biggest issue. I was also thinking, well, the biggest point is to convince all of the parties involved to do it,
Mm-hmm.
basically. So I'm trying to like think of the project to reach like even the conservative parts, like that maybe do not care so much about the environment, but they care about how to say, since Sweden joined the NATO, there's Försvarsmakten, I don't know how to translate it, this military apparatus. They were talking about that the cities should be as sustainable as possible, even with their food. So that would be like somehow to try to balance it, so to get on board the people that maybe don't believe in climate change, because there are these like people that don't believe that there is a climate change, because they could be the biggest risk for the project, because they have become more powerful in the last years in the municipality where we live, like it became more right wing. So they could be like a problem. But maybe through formulating the project in a way that it will be accessible for them also, or understandable for them, it could reduce the risk to have them working against the project itself. And then
That's
of
a really
course,
good example, like of third parties influencing the project, or like external powerful actors that can influence the project in a negative way, or they can sabotage the project,
yeah,
or even like going like a bit further. You normally, when you have when you are developing projects with multiple stakeholders, you run the risks of them dropping off of the project. So like quitting or leaving the project in the middle of the execution. So this is a very common risk in projects. And most of people, they don't count this as a risk, but there is a risk. And when that happens, some managers are not prepared for that. So this could be something maybe relevant for your project, Marketa. You were about to say something. I interrupted you. Sorry.
yeah. The other part is the science. Because I am not a scientist, I have no idea how the nature is responding to climate change, and I'm not sure the scientists exactly know. But I know that there are some researchers, people researching it. For example, what kind of trees could grow fast enough, so we don't have to wait for 20 years, so we actually get some effect of having the trees in the area. So that would be good to have a research team that actually could be more accountable for choosing the right trees. Because I don't want to be accountable for if I cannot pick the trees. I have no idea about the trees, so to give it some base, it has to have some substance. Like, I will not be convincing, maybe for suggesting the trees, but if you have the experts, like a research team or some scientists that have already been working on these things, it can be more convincing for the stakeholders. So they don't, yeah, because I think, okay, I am like some, person with these ideas about nature and social sustainability, but what power like do I have? So it's good to have some people, like some doctors and PhDs in science, that was like, we really need to do this now. It's important just to give it some more substance. Because if the people will not believe in it, they are not going to be working properly.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
Yeah.
That's a really good observation. And how would you categorize this risk? Is it technology related, project management, organizational, or external?
With the researchers,
Yeah, with the issue with the climate change you mentioned,
it's not something I can do. So it's external
it's
risk.
external.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good. Hugo and Robert, do you have anything to share about your project plan? Any risks that you identify?
Our group is the one combined of late intake students, so we haven't really started yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, not much
Okay,
to share here.
No problems. It's okay. Hugo has anything to say? Okay, we can move. Let's go. Okay, this is an important part, guys, of the risk analysis in your project plan. Now it's important that you pay attention because it's how to include the risk analysis in your project plan and how you'll be assessed by this section, by this knowledge. So first of all, we expect that you present the risks in a table, like similar to that table that I presented, like listing all the risks. You can like even create categorizations, A, B, C, risk A, B, C, D, E, and so forth. You are expected to value the risks, so or to calculate the likelihood versus consequence in the table. So you have to make the multiplications as we've seen before. And in the table, we also expected to present a short response planning, like just like this, in a very short sentence. We wanted to present what's the risk response or the planning action to tackle the risks. Okay, so a table like this, it will be really. You don't have to include the probability impact table. This is just for the record for just to understand the logic. But this table we expect you to include in your project plan. And oh yeah. So you can place the table as an appendix in your project plan. And besides the table, we want you to prioritize 3 to 4 risks and write, like make a short reflection on why they should be prioritized and how you conclude or how you came up with this conclusion that these 3 to 4 risks are the most important ones in your project. Okay, then you base your argumentation on that calculation of the value risks. You can also use gap analysis if you want. And mention who is responsible for the risk response, who is the actor who will be accountable for it. And also in the appendix, it will be good if you include, for example, a brief reflection about how and when the group decided the likelihood and the consequences, how you came up with the risk formulation, how did you came up with the risk assessment, the risk value, how did you make the calculations, how did you attribute the value to the risks. So why the climate change, for example, in your project Marketa, is it receives like 20 points in the risk analysis, and why this is a priority for you, who is responsible, and how you will handle this, so like one after another. So basically everything that we've seen from the beginning of this lecture till now. Okay, have any questions about the instructions? No. Okay, so then we will go for a short break. Let's stretch our legs. We take 15 minutes break. Now it's 10:55. We are back at 10 past 11, okay? And then we'll talk about leadership. See you in 15 minutes. Okay, so we are back. I will share with you that case about the trees that were planted by the Brazilian municipality. Let's see here. Yeah, so I'll share on the chat so you can watch it. It's a short YouTube video later on. I'm gonna share my screen again. Do you see my screen presentation mode? Okay, great. Now, guys, we are going to talk about leadership and group dynamics. These are very important aspects of project management. So, starting with the leadership, that is it's a key stakeholder. The project manager or the project leader is a key stakeholder for the successful development and implementation of the project. And we move from the planning stage now to the execution. So we talk about the leadership during the execution stage, although the leadership is also very important in the planning and pre-study. But sometimes the project leader is not involved in the planning. So he has a more important role in the execution and the project closure. We will address in the second part of the session. Let's see if I am recording again. Yeah, I'm recording. Some leadership theories to understand different approaches to analyze and reflect about leadership styles and their impact within the project management, and the group development and group dynamics and how they are also related to the leadership. So these are three questions for us to reflect. Do you think that good leaders are born as leaders? Can a person be born as a leader? Have you ever heard this expression? You are natural, or you were born as a leader. Do you agree with that? Or do you think we can learn and become a leader by learning and practicing? Or do you think that people with like power, they are natural leaders, or they can become leaders because of the power and influence they have over other people? What do you think?
I think it's a mix. Because if I'm observing, for example, a group of kids, some kids are more dominating than others. Yeah, but then even if you have these tendencies, you have to learn how to be a leader, I think.
Okay.
I don't think it has like some like challenges, I would say, to be a leader. It's a bit different than if you were like dominating your play polls, like your friends in a game, then if you have a responsibility.
So you think it could be both?
Yeah, I think it can be both.
Okay. Robert and Hugo, do you guys have any other opinions or comments? Okay. So yeah, these are kind of questions that scientists have been asking themselves and others like for a really long time. And there are many theories and approaches and theoretical models that have been developed to with some propositions about how to based on the personal traits, like leaders are born or leaders become leaders based on the development, based on their circumstances, or based on their behavior. So here I brought four theoretical approaches that explain leadership from different perspectives. And the first one is the trait approach, or the trait theories. They were developed early in the 30s or 40s, more or less. And based on this approach, the scientists, or like it's believed that leaders have some certain qualities or personal traits that are inherent to leader, like some qualities, some traits are inherent to leaders, and some people have these qualities, or meaning they are born as leaders, they have it naturally, so they are natural leaders. So and this theory also affirms, or it proposes that people with some kind of characteristics or qualities, they will be better leaders than others. So, and this will distinguish them, distinguish the leaders to the followers. So the leaders have these characteristics and the followers or the teams do not have. The behavioral theories, they're pretty much focused on the behavioral aspects and attitudinal aspects of a leader. So what does a good leader do? So it's these theories that were developed they were more predominant between the 40s and the 60s. And the focus is pretty much on what leaders actually do rather than their personal characteristics or personal traits. So this theory, it's still like kind of predominant. We use a lot when we do scientific research about organizational management and leadership. So we focus quite a lot on the behavioral aspects to understand which kind of behavior the leaders adopt or follow and what are the consequences based on this behavior. But we no longer believe that the leader becomes a leader only because of the behavior. There are other circumstances that is not only behavioral, it's not only about what the leader does. So there are other circumstances that can make a leader to be an efficient leader. The contingency theories, they were predominant between the 60s and the 80s. And from this approach, we can have an understanding that the leaders become leaders or they act as leaders depending on the context. It's contingental. Leadership is contingental, depends on the situation or context. So this explains why some leaders are good in some sort of context, but they will be bad in other contexts. They will not be seen as leaders in other situations because the leadership is situational. It depends on external actors, external factors as well. So, and the leaders, they must adapt their style to match situational demands. So like follower readiness, task complexity, organizational culture, and etc. And finally, we have the power and influence theories that they were predominant from the 50s till nowadays. So this is the most predominant theory or approach right now. And this is pretty much focused on what's the source of a leader's power, why and how some people become good leaders, which kind of power they exert or they gain or they develop. So based on this, we can understand why some leaders are successful and others are not. So how they use their power, their influence to persuade people to achieve the goals. So different tactics of influence like persuasion, inspiration, coalition building, and etc. There are many other views and many other approaches. Leadership or organizational leadership and leadership theories, they are it's a huge extent of literature, but these are the four main approaches that we think that are important for you guys to reflect about. So now another question to you. What's the difference between a manager and a leader? If any difference, if difference exists. So do you think, is it the same thing or what differentiates them?
Well, a manager could be appointed, but a leader could be someone who has a lot of capabilities which comes up during the project, where it becomes a natural leader.
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer. Can we have more than one leader within the same project?
Would be, yeah.
Okay.
But I think so, because you can also shift roles. I mean, if you should get to this mature stage of teamwork and you see, okay, now the other person has some good qualities in this area. So I can validate that. So I can also step back from one's role and leave space to somebody else who has these qualities more in that area. That would be an ideal situation. But of course, it can also create a conflict if the group is not in this mature phase. So there can be a conflict between these two people. And then there could be people that are some kind of self-appointed leaders. you know.
I
They
see.
want to be the leaders, but they actually do not have the qualities.
Okay, then a follow-up question on that. Do you think a manager, an appointed manager, may not be a leader or may not be the project leader?
It could happen
Mm-hmm.
if he doesn't have the competences.
Okay, that's a good answer. Yeah, we have a model here that is Whelan, I think, is the name of the scientist who created this approach. This is based on the power, and then here we can see the difference between the manager and the leader. And maybe they could be, it could be the same thing, but sometimes they are not. But the manager, they may be a leader regardless of his or her capability or capacity or competence, because we have like many types of power, or and base the amount of power or the focus of power, we can then debate about the differences between the leader and the manager. But for example, we have the formal, it can be like formal and informal. So a manager would be like an appointed leader. So it has like some sort of a formal leadership role. So in some ways, it will be, he or she will be a leader anyways. So, and here we have like different bases of power. For example, the expert power, like when the person has specialized knowledge and then the person becomes a leader because others want to follow this person because this person has knowledge, or the person has information like valuable information about the organization, about the procedure, about how to gain access to resources. So the person becomes a leader because the person possesses this kind of information. And then we have like this example that we just discussed about the legitimate leadership, which is like the manager, the appointed manager. So the appointed manager will have some sort of legitimacy because he or she will be the legitimate leader. So being formally appointed gives some sort of power over the team. So even if the team doesn't like or doesn't believe that this is the most appropriate leader for the project, but still there is some legitimation on the power, on the leadership. So we have the referent leadership or the referent power that is based on the personal characteristics, and we just discussed about the personal traits. This could be also a reason for people to follow a leader based on his or her own characteristics, like charisma, for example. We have like many charismatic leaders, especially in politics. We have many examples of politicians who gain the trust and who are elected based on their charisma and not based on their competence or not based on the knowledge or information they have, but based on the charisma. So this is something that, especially with the social media nowadays and social platforms, we can see that this is way more recurrent. We have the contact leader, like leaders who have connections and relationships and social influence, so they become leaders because of their social network. And finally, the coercive leadership or coercive power. It's related to the leaders who have the power to or ability to punish, to threaten, or to impose consequences to the team. So they are also leaders. So either we even if we like or not, so these are leaders that we can identify within a project. So, and they might, as I mentioned before, they might be formal or informal. So there are some informal leaders that can fall into one of or more of these categories that can also exert some sort of power and influence the project outcomes at the end. Based on these characteristics and definitions, and here I brought some examples, what's the best type of leadership? Or based on your experience, what's the best type of leadership?
Well, if the person has the knowledge, then it is much more easier to listen to them, of course. But if someone has the charisma but doesn't have the knowledge, it's going to come out eventually during the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
The best would be if the charisma and the knowledge would go together. If
Mhm.
there's this natural thing that one wants to follow the person because they are motivated, they have this kind of thing,
Mhm.
and they know what they're talking about. That would be that, and they have the role of the manager. I don't know how many times this happened, but maybe sometimes it does.
Mhm. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to have them all within the same person. But for example, you mentioned the charisma. If just imagine that you are conducting or developing a project within the military service or institution. Do you think the charisma will be useful there?
Yeah, not for me. I don't like the military.
Yeah, yeah, but imagine that you are cooperating with the military with a military organization, and you are leading a project with them. Do you think charisma would be something relevant in in this specific context, or would be
No,
maybe more a coercive power or coercive kind of leadership will be more valuable?
coercive. No, I don't think I like that either.
Mm, mm,
No, I think I mean, military, it's very hard. An example. I
mm,
think what I would need from them would be to be open for giving us some money to to reach
mhm.
this goals to become more sustainable, as a city in case we would be in war. So I wouldn't look
Uh-huh.
for a charisma, more for being willing to cooperate.
Hmm. So in your own project, which kind of leadership would you like to have then?
Well, that's a really good question because I was thinking it would be good to have some public figure that people like. Uh, but it would be better if the person would not belong to a specific party because it should reach people across their political views or whether they come from Sweden or immigrant
Mhm.
background. Uh, so somebody convincing, of course,
Mm.
who would like want to pull in the people, like, can we do it together? Because the idea of the social sustainability is to get people together from all
Mhm.
of the backgrounds.
Mhm.
So we do it together, this reforestation.
I see.
So I don't know. There is this sustainability team in
Mhm.
the commune, you know.
Mhm.
So I guess it would have to be maybe them to
Okay.
address, and
Mhm.
not really the political representatives, because
I
the
see.
political representatives, they are just going to go in, I think,
Mhm.
2 years, then there will be somebody
Will
else.
change. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I would not want them to be it, because then we will have like a weak spot,
Mm. I see.
because if the
Mm.
politics change,
Mm. Mm.
then we will lose this person probably. And also there will be a lot of people, they will not maybe like them, they could be the wrong party. So it would be good to somebody who can talk to the people,
Mhm.
but it's also scientifically kind of. So could it be few leaders, or does one needs to have one?
No, it can be more than one. Because as I mentioned, this is as I mentioned before, this is something that we sometimes we forget to reflect that there is both the formal and the informal leaders, and this is really important because sometimes the informal leaders they have more power or more influential power than the appointed leader. So it's always good to reflect about these characteristics, this basis of power, because if you are a project leader and then you can identify some leadership characteristics within the people in your team, you can gather them together. You can like ask them for support or to help the team with the what we call the organizational buy-in. Like if you need the team to believe in your idea or to be more motivated or to change the direction, and maybe they are not so willing to do so, by engaging informal leaders, you can address the team more easily and you can get them to do what you expect if you have informal leaders working in collaboration with you. So this is something really important in project management as well, to identify these characteristics within the people and maybe even reinforce them if you have if it's needed. So
So you think it would work like to because we were thinking to have like a conference of all the different groups in town. Like there are this like groups from the immigrant like areas, then there are like the retirees, the schools, to have like the representatives of the groups, if they like the project, they could be the ones motivating and driving, like getting the people in. Because if they are few, they're going to reach the different kind of people. But if it will be one, there will always be objections against that person. Like the immigrant community will not feel represented. Then if it is one from the immigrant community, the old Swedish, natives, they will feel like, oh, this is not one of us,
Yeah,
like
that's actually a good idea, because then you can rely on the contact leaders or the contact power, so the leaders who have connections or relationships, or they are influential within their networks or group of people. So instead of like mobilizing a big group of people, you can mobilize only one leader. So and you can like have this person spreading the word, or like gathering more people to believe and buy your idea. So that is a good strategy actually.
you mean like to have one person or no?
I mean, it depends. I don't know the specificities of your project, but you can have one formal leader, one formal project manager, but you can count on these informal leaders who will be part of the project, or they are like
Yeah,
stakeholders in your project. I assume that they will be,
yeah,
because they will be
yeah.
affected. So you can count or identify informal leaders, and you can help them to, or they can help you to achieve your goals. We call it in the literature we call boundary spanners. So they help to disseminate the knowledge and they help to convince people of something. In your case,
Yeah.
to like believe or support a project, but it could be something else like implementing a new technology, a new policy, developing a new product, and etc. So these boundary spanners are informal leaders that could help you to achieve your goals at the end.
Yeah, because I think there have been like, is it okay if I talk about it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, because I think like people from this ecologisk, and
Mm-hmm.
climate change groups, it doesn't really work.
Mm,
It doesn't seep in all of the communities. Like people that don't have money, they cannot afford maybe to buy ecologisk, or they
I see.
have so many other things to do.
Other
Like
priorities.
yeah, but for the children, like planting these trees, it's like symbolic to become part of the city, so
Mm-hmm.
everybody feels at home.
Yeah,
Um,
understand. Yeah, that's something that you can consider, definitely. Mm.
okay.
So, moving in, another thing that is also important when we are defining or reflecting about the leadership characteristics and leadership styles is what motivates people. Why are people engaged or not engaged in your project? And why is your team not motivated enough to do what you were expecting to do? So there is a scientist that is called that is Maslow. Maybe you have heard about the hierarchy of needs, Maslow hierarchy of needs, or pyramid as it's called. When you are discussing about leadership and like job related aspects, we can also rely on this hierarchy of needs to identify what are the basic needs or the most like abstract needs of people, and try to relate to what motivate them to behave in some ways. And based on that, based on like identifying this needs, from basic to more abstract needs, we can then motivate them. You can like develop or change our leadership styles. We'll talk about leadership styles as well. So starting, for example, from the basic needs, what people expect when you're working in projects, they expect wages, working hours, lunch breaks, like basic things, to a more abstract level, issues like freedom with responsibility, possibility for self-development, stimulating work environment. So by identifying these needs within your project team, you can then motivate them, or you can redirect or change your leadership style to address their needs and then achieve the end goals of the project. And here we have this situational leadership model that is based on contingency theory. And from this model, we can understand that the styles of leadership, they are based on the relation between the leader and the team. So if you have a more supporting leader and with providing more instructions, you have like the selling leader. That's kind of like the ideal world, a leader that who provides lots of instructions, information, but also supports the team. Or a leader that supports less but provide more instructions is a telling leader, as we say, we call in this model. Or a leader that offers less support and less instructions. It's a leader that delegates tasks or delegates responsibilities to others. And finally, a leader that provides lots of support but not so many instructions is a more participating leader. It's a leader who is with a team and working and supporting and being with them, but provides less directions or less orders, so to say. So which style is more suitable? So this depends on the competences of the group and how well they will perform their activities according to the project goals. We cannot say that, oh, being a selling leader is better than a delegating leader, or being a talent leader is better than participating leader. It depends on the circumstances. So that's why it's based on contingency theory. Also, focusing or trying to understand the group dynamics. So because the leader needs to be aligned, needs to understand what the group expects, what the team expects to achieve within and without the project. So the group dynamics then describes what the situation looks like regarding the interaction between different individuals in a group. Always remembering that we have, when we work in teams, work in groups, we have people with different background, different characteristics, different expectations, different needs, and they will behave accordingly, according to their own needs, their own expectations. So understanding the group dynamics is then important, so we can approach the attitudes and the behavioral characteristics of the groups. And then based on this understanding, we can create new structures, redefine organizational processes within the projects and how they function in order to align them, because at the end they are resources to be managed. So time, people, salary, and everything so that is involved. So we have to think from a rational perspective on how to reorganize our leadership style in order to motivate them. So, and this functions both in traditional businesses and non-businesses settings. So, as you mentioned before, Marketa, at the school with the kids, they have leaders, formal, informal leaders, and all their group dynamics is similar. On what this is what happens with when people are gathering within similar goals. And then there is this very famous framework that is called the DISC framework. It's a framework that characterizes the people behavioral styles. So these styles, they demonstrate what people prioritize in a project and how they collaborate with others. So in a project setting, it's always good to have a kickoff, for example, and try to understand like or try to categorize people, whether they are more extroverted or introverted, what's more important for them, like the results or the relationships, the structure of the project or the organization, or the communication and the leadership. So it falls under these categories here, and this framework is quite famous because you can have the dominance, the influence, stability, and compliance. So that stands for DISC. And one important thing is that we should consider when we work with multicultural groups, because sometimes we forget that people have different cultural backgrounds, and this will influence on their perceptions, their behaviors, and attitudes. And this will impact the group dynamics as well. So we know, for example, based on scientific studies, that in Sweden, people normally working in groups, they fall more in the yellow quadrant. They care more about who and the communication. So the communication is really, really important in a project. While in the rest of the world is more like in the green, like other countries are more like in the relationships and the stability. So why is more important. But I mean, different people can have different traits and different characteristics in their personality and how they will behave within the projects. So here there is another very famous, so to say, personality framework. It's Myers-Briggs. So this Myers-Briggs framework, it characterizes people also based on introvert and extrovert, but also whether they're more focused on thinking or feeling, and if they are, just one second. If they follow more the intuition, or if they are more rational, whether they are more judging or they are more percepting people. So yeah, this we can have as like a personality tests. So it's a kind of famous, and most of the personality tests, they derive from these Myers-Briggs personality tests. So it's useful. It's something interesting. I don't know if you have ever filled the form, or some recruitment companies, they use personality tests to assess or to try to understand the candidate's personality before proceeding with the recruitment. So it's kind of common. So what do you guys think? What are the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of tests?
Well, somehow when you make this test, it's like how it is at the moment with the person,
Mhm.
but a person is going to adjust to the new situation and to the group dynamics, which can be totally different in a different group. So you can't really 100% like rely on it, because a lot of the work we do today is in teams.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have one role in one team, but you can have like take some different role. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it is like so shifting. Like I have been working with many different teams in the last
Mm-hmm.
year,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be so different. So you
Mm-hmm.
cannot really 100% say this person is going to be exactly like this. So I don't know how reliable it is.
Yeah, they are reliable. They are scientifically tested and validated, but you gave the really good answer. So you cannot like categorize people in a box and expect them to behave accordingly or constantly according to that categorization. So we are complex beings. So we change according to the situation, according to the context, according to our needs, as we see like in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if we have our needs fulfilled in one category, then maybe we'll act in a different way, or if you don't have our needs. If I don't have my morning coffee, I feel really stressed. I feel introvert. I don't want to talk to anybody. I will be like very rational. I will be very judgmental. But if I have my morning coffee, I'll be very extrovert. I'll be very like feeling. I'll be like directing my actions based on my perception and not the judging, So there are many aspects to consider. So that's a really good answer. So we can rely on them sometimes to maybe try to understand the basics and how people operate, but we shouldn't like fully categorize people or believe that they will just be or they will fall in one of these quadrants and it will be like that consistently. Now talking about the group development phases, this is something very important when you are developing a project. You are gathering your team, forming your team, or selecting people to be part of your team. So there is this Tuckman model that it started with 4 phases and now it was refined to 5 phases. It's a widely used model to explain how the group development process, from the forming until the project ends. So based on this dynamics, we can see how the leader or a manager can better support the team and what is expected from the leader. For example, in the forming stage, when you are forming or gathering people to work in the project, there is little agreement. There is an unclear purpose because people are not fully aware of the project goals and the activities, the resources. So which kind of tasks, which kind of leadership is expected at this moment when you are gathering people? But then over time, people will be more willing and understanding about their responsibilities. Maybe there will be some conflict. So like a mediating role is more expected from the leader and so forth. Like when in the norming phase, for example, when everything is more or less aligned, so the leader will be more a facilitator, is expected to be a more facilitator to keep it smooth. And when it comes to performance, the leader must be when there's a clear vision and purpose, so the team is very focused. So the leader must be like a maestro, like delegating tasks, monitoring, coordinating, and less responsible for like basic things and like basic guidance and direction. And finally, in the adjourning phase, or like when the project is about to end, the leader then will just make sure that everybody has a good feeling about the achievements, like recognizing people, acknowledging their efforts, and so forth. So why this is important? Because from what we normally see in projects, so the team effectiveness starts like getting better in the norming and performing stages. So in these stages, there are more things happening. So this is where the efforts or like the fine tuning is better under these stages. So the leadership will have different roles than the forming and adjourning, for example. But it doesn't mean that in the storming stage, where there will be many conflicts, the leader will not be present. The leader must assume different roles based on the situation, based on the context. So that's why this comes from the contingency theory and explains on how like the fluctuations within the project will affect the leadership styles. And then here comparing the Tuckman and the Whelan models. So like we have the forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. And Whelan, this scientist proposed a different approach with a similar categorization, but here's some issues that are important to be considered, or questions that are raised in different stages or different phases of the project. For example, in the affiliation and security in the beginning of the project. So who are you? Who am I? What are we supposed to do? What do I want? What do I want to work with? So this kind of questions, they will be posed when the team is being formed. So then it comes the second stage, the opposition and conflict. So who is in charge? What is my authority? So how to solve conflicts, how to address disparities, information asymmetry, and so forth. The trust and structure, so how to handle the open communication, so the appreciation of each other, so how to create this environment in order to make the process more smooth. So, and finally, the work and productivity, so how to manage the final conflict, at the end of the project, what now, how to proceed, how to the project closure, so what's going to happen. So these kind of questions are posed in within these stages of the group development phases. And the Tuckman says, like at the end of the project will be either the grief, like if the objectives were not achieved, or the relief that the group feels good about the achievements and the project goals. Yeah, I will speed up a little bit because we're running out of time, but this is a mix between the Whelan model and the situational leadership. So mostly based on the individual's capacity. For example, what is expected from the leaders based on the individual's capacity within different stages of the group development. For example, in the quadrant number 1, when the project is starting, so the individuals have little or no knowledge about the task, what is expected from them. So the leader is expected to provide instructions, frequent follow-up, so to be more a telling leader, as we saw in the other figure. So when people gather more, gain more knowledge about the tasks, about the project, they increase their self-confidence. So the leader will be more selling. It will be like a selling type of leadership when the leader will explain decisions, clarify some questions, or help the team to move on. And then in the third quadrant, the trust and structure, is when the individuals are more committed to the goals because they already have lots of knowledge, they know what is expected from them, so they have a fair knowledge about the project and the project demands. So the leader then will be more delegatory. It will be a more delegatory leadership. The leader will share ideas, support decision making, and be more present within these issues. And finally, when in the work and productive stage, where the individuals have large knowledge about the project, strong commitment, so then the leader will hand the ownership of planning and ownership of decision making. So that's what is expected. Yeah, I'll just skip that. This one. Yeah. So reasons why teams fail. So here we brought some issues, or we raised some issues that are common issues on why project teams fail. The first one is poorly developed or unclear goals. We have seen that before, but and that's why the project charter is something really, really important, because the project charter will sell the project. In the project charter, you need to you need to formulate a very clear project goal. People should know what's expected from them and what's going to happen at the end of the project. So are you going to you're going to have planted 100 trees in the main square? Are you going to implement a new AI system within the organization? Are you going to plan, I don't know, a trip with your family, or going to conduct or to undergo renovation, so the goals need to be really well defined, because otherwise the project team can all fail. Lack of project team motivation, so that's why the leadership is important, to identify the needs and what motivates people in different stages and how to keep them motivated. Poor communication is most of the projects that the failing projects, they fail because of poor communication. This is a big issue. So then there is again the role of the leader to identify what motivates people and which stage of the group development they are situated, so the leader can behave properly. And then the poor leadership, so having a poor leader or a weak leader can also be a reason of failing. And then external and internal conflicts that are also associated with poor leadership, because a good leader is expected to be able to manage conflicts and to mediate conflicts. So these are just some examples. There are many more reasons, and I hope you in your project do not experience any of them. And there, besides all these risks, besides the different types of leadership that are expected or unexpected, there is a pressure to a project team that the project team and the leader have to handle. For example, inadequate resources, unrealistic deadlines, unclear goals, inadequate planning, changes within the project. So this puts lots of pressure in the project team. So the team must be really consistent and working together with a good leadership, so you can navigate these issues, you can embrace these tensions, and you can solve them in a timely manner and consuming as less resources as possible. So, but these are normal pressures that we see in project teams. So to wrap up, then today we focus on the planning and the execution stage in today's session. So in the planning, we address the risk management, the role of risk management within the project management, how to identify the risks, how to prioritize the risks, assess the risks, and how to define strategies to either mitigate, avoid, or reduce the risks. And in the execution phase, we addressed or reflected about leadership and group dynamics, the leadership styles, the phases of group development and their impact within the project, and finally, the roles within the group, both of the leaders, but also the team members, and what's expected from these actors in different stages of the group development. Do you guys have any questions or comments?
Yeah, can I just have a short reflection?
Yes, please. Yeah.
About the conflict that the manager should be able to help to solve conflicts, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I just when I was thinking about my teamwork, I realized that sometimes people are in denial that there is a conflict, you know, which I
Yeah.
find really hard to work with it, because you can see there's something, but the person is not willing to talk about it. What to do about it then? Like, do you have any tips?
Yeah. Okay. Now let's. Yeah, there is lots of literature about conflict management and this kind of things, but focusing now on the leadership and the group development, what we identified or what we discussed today. So there are few things that you as a project manager you can do. First of all, is try to identify based on the hierarchy of needs, what motivates these people and why they are having conflict with others. This could be one reason, like maybe their expectations or their needs are not being fulfilled, or they are having conflicts because other people are preventing them to achieve this needs or to realize these needs or these expectations they have. This could be only one source of the conflict. Of course, there are multicultural aspects or situational aspects that could be also the source of it, but this could be a good start. And as a leader, sometimes if we go back and reflect about the categories of power, so maybe you are being seen as a more formative or formal leader or legitimate leader, that, okay, this is the leader that is appointed, but maybe this type of leadership is not appropriate to solve or to address the conflict. Maybe you need a more charismatic approach. Maybe you need a more coercive approach to address the conflict. Or maybe you can rely on an informal leader to solve the conflict for you. So you can identify another leader who is more charismatic or who is influential, who has informal power or informal influences, in an informal way, that can help you to navigate the conflicts. if you as a leader are not being able to manage that. That's the tips or the advice that I could give to you.
That
Uh,
makes sense. Thank
yeah,
you so much.
I have worked in many projects, and I always rely on informal leaders as a resource to help me. Always. This is something that not all. It took me a long time to understand these dynamics and to trust people and to like engage the informal leaders to play a role in your team. You know, to allow them to play the role and yeah, gather them together with you and help them and encourage them to influence others in a good way. So yeah, think about informal leaders. That could be a solution.
So you kind of talk to them directly? Like you
Yeah,
say, I see you are doing really good there. Do you think you could have a word with them?
yeah,
Kind of.
definitely,
Okay,
definitely. Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you.
But I mean, there is always a risk because they can also influence people for the bad, you know. So
Right.
that's the issue with informal leaders. But it's always good if you have them in your side, on your side.
Mm. That's good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so that was all for today. So I hope you enjoy this session. And yeah, the material will be it will be the recorded material will be available on Blackboard, and you can also access not only the PowerPoints but also the exercises and the material to practice what we have discussed today. So thank you very much for attending and for watching.
Thank
And
you so much. Have
yes,
a nice day.
thank
Bye.
you. The same.